of Sukhanwar Bohot Achche, poetry reading and discussion. It gives me immense pleasure to be a part of this session amongst all literature lovers. Poetry is one of the main pillars of literature. It allows us to put forth our views and sentiments, release our emotions, and leave an impact greater than any other force. As Ghalib rightly said, इस सादगी पे कौन ना मर जाए ए खुदा लड़ते हैं और हाथ में तलवार भी नहीं. Mirza Ghalib is a name synonymous with philosophical and love poetry in Urdu and Persian. He is considered one of the most popular and influential poets of the Mughal era. His deep thoughts about life and love left a deep imprint on hearts and minds of the listeners. He is one of the most revered and celebrated poets of the present generation. Our love for this legendary soul has brought us all here today to celebrate his 220th birth anniversary. In the honor of Mirza Ghalib, I would like to read a beautiful piece written by him. ना था कुछ तो खुदा है तो खुदा था, कुछ ना होता तो खुदा होता, डुबोया मुझको होने नहीं, ना होता मैं तो क्या होता. Following the words of Ghalib Sahab, हैं और भी दुनिया में सुखनवर बहुत अच्छे, meaning there are other very good poets in this world, I would now take the opportunity to introduce to you the young writers of the poetry and prose. Azad Ashim Sharma, Drupad Das, Ishan Khandpur, Sumiran A. Kashyap, who will read their work to us today, while Jairaj Singh will moderate the session to explore the use of digital platforms as a medium to express themselves and share their poetry with a larger audience. Azad Ashim Sharma is a 25-year-old poet living in South London. He is affiliated with Brighton underground poetry scene. Furthermore, during his time as a student at Sussex, Azad co-founded the Sussex Guild of Poetry, which organized student poetry events and circulated a number of free poetry pamphlets on both Sussex and Brighton University campuses. In 2017, Azad's first collection of poetry entitled Against the Frame. We have Sumiran A. Kashyap, who is a financial services recruitment consultant turned freelance writer. She divides her professional time between commissioned pieces of writing on subjects in the premium to luxury segment. Primarily, the overlap between beauty and wellness as well as fashion and culture. Drupad Das, his visiting card says advocate. Other times, he is an untrained artist training himself with acrylics and blank canvases. Or a poet trying to articulate the world within to the world without. Ishan Khandpur, with all the noise around us, poetry is his earphone. For him, it's always been about the stories, be it through writing, reading, or just listening. An advertising sleuth, even work is all about the stories. Last one we have Mr. Jairaj Singh, who is a New Delhi-based writer and journalist. He is the editor of Delhi O, India Today's opinion website. Prior to this, he was the editor of Time Out Delhi, and before that, the editor of two papers called Hindustan Times, HT Edge and HT Mini. We welcome you all. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you for coming today. You're sparing your Sunday afternoon for poetry. So it's, yay to poetry, because poetry, I feel, has few takers in general. But thank you so much for being here. I'm going to actually ask the panelists right now to introduce themselves about basically what they do and how they came to be poets. So we can start from you and then just go like that.
Thank you. So for me, poetry sort of came a little naturally. I work in advertising, but I don't get to enjoy so much of the creative. It's not work. Better? Yeah. So I don't get to enjoy so much of the creative side. I'm in account management, and while I see all that creative juice flowing around me, it sort of became a little jarring. I wanted to get into it too somehow, and there was a lot of suppressed angst within me, the timelines, the whole madness around me. So I found this as a great escape for me. And yeah, I just started dabbing around with writing and started showing it to a few of my copywriter buddies. And from there, it just picked on, and now I've been writing for the last, I think, 5 years.
Were you always a writer?
No, actually, I was far from it. I was not really good at this language. I was not really great at English earlier on. It's just something that came to me when I was in college, and I used to just get bored. I used to pick up a book after book after book. I'm like, hey, maybe even I can attempt something. The first 2, 3 times I attempted something, I tore it to pieces. I'm like, never again. But yeah, eventually it sort of picked up.
And what kind of poetry? What kind of stress?
There's generally no style. It's about what I feel at that particular moment. Most of my poetry is written within a span of 5 to 10 minutes, with a review maybe 2 or 3 days later. I like forget about it after that. And if it's anger, it's going to be angry. If it's dark, it's going to be dark. If it's humor, it's going to be humorous. So it's just with the flow.
What about you?
So I came into poetry kind of through music, actually. I was a musician when I was about 17. I played in a band. Didn't work out. I think I was a bit better with words than I was with music. So, and then I went to study English literature for my undergrad at Sussex. And Sussex is quite an interesting campus uni in the grand scheme of kind of great British poetry. So I had a lot of visiting lecturers from Cambridge, such as J.H. Prynne, and he's like kind of godfather of late modernist poetics in the UK. And Keston Sutherland was there, Joe Luna, Sarah Klangle. I could name drop forever, but there was a kind of generational thing where students and staff would get together to write, and they would do organised readings and events, and I very much got involved with that scene, which is now posthumously called Brighton Underground. And then in terms of style, I guess, I've always been really inspired by avant-garde poetry, mainly from Europe, but increasingly I'm reading across the world because translation is such a great venture that's going on now. And I'd probably put my poetry on the level.
Sorry to cut you there, but I wanted to actually ask you, what do you mean by the underground sort of poetry scene? What does that entail?
So I would draw a distinction between large presses and small presses. So small presses that are independently owned, they're not for profit, and they also circulate. Their poetry is probably more politically active and engaged. Like generally, the poets are also activists. So one thing that may have spurred on an interest was the 2008 financial crash. A lot of poets went to revisit Marx's original text, Das Kapital, and were working within a Marxist literary theoretical tradition. So that's what I mean by underground poetry.
Okay. What about you, sir?
I'm gonna share a childhood anecdote which makes for a useful explanation as to how I got into poetry. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, my mom found me on the terrace of our house with my favorite doll, which I named Olivia. And she found me cradling that doll in my lap, talking to an imaginary figure standing next to me. And my mom decided to play along and asked me who that was. And I said that is Eric Richardson, and he's my daughter Olivia's father. So, as I said, my mom was playing along, and she said, "Where's he now?" I said, "He's a descendant of Count Dracula, and he's fighting for his rightful place on the throne, so he's not here, and we're waiting for him." So I have no idea where I got that story from, and I think I frightened my mom quite a bit with stories like these. But I think you lose the fertility of imagination when you try to explain where it comes from. As I grew older, that sort of blended with this capacity to talk the hind leg off a donkey. And I realized that there's one thing I can do when I'm tired of talking myself, which is to write. So a lot of people used to tell me, "You talk so much, why don't you write it all down?" And I think that mix of being tired of talking and having something of an imagination sowed the seeds of poetry. So I still have both those qualities, so poetry becomes a way of being rather than a skill to cultivate or irrigate.
So do you use your poetry to write about stories that you kind of imagined, or how does it turn out to be?
If I have to be very honest, all of my poetry is me talking at myself. And when you write it down, it gives you um, something of a picture, what it looks like. And when you start editing it, maybe a certain degree of refinement comes into it, and then people say, wow, that's a piece of poetry right there. So it's very cathartic to me. There's no vested interest in it. I think poetry is more about the rawness and the honesty of it rather than, over obsessing about the content or the purpose. I think poetry is a place where the story actually writes itself if you're honest enough. So it's something to have fun with.
What about you, Dhruv?
I think I came across poetry first time at my house. My father was an avid poet. He did his thesis on war poetry, so I grew up reading a lot of Sasson, a lot of Wilfred Owen. It was very moving. And as I think as I grew up, in school, me and Jerry, we started writing poetry together.
So I think it should be known that Drupad and I were in school together.
Yeah. Started writing poetry together. I don't know what Jerry's motives were, but I was definitely writing to woo women at that point of time. And I realized that, there's this entire art form of poetry where you express your thoughts. It's not very lengthy. You can be super articulate, you can be super precise, and people seem to like it. Across the wall, Mio girls, they were very happy about it. So I said, let's run with it. And as time passed, I've been pretty much writing ever since. I have not really showed. I used to secretly publish my poems on, these digital websites, Tumblr and Blogspot back in the day, so as to retain it. So I can. Fortunately, that's the reason I still have it, because many computers have come and gone. But poetry has been something that has just stayed with me ever since, simply because I guess there's no way to do without it.
So, I think that I get a sense is that we write poems to sometimes engage with the suppressed self or to woo women. But I want to actually explore, why do you write poetry? And I wanted to sort of dig deeper into what do you feel writing poetry achieves? So if you could just talk to us and explain to us why.
So,
I'll start.
yeah. So, well, for me, it's really a pure form of escapism. It's how I sort of break free from the mundane. I have been working for the last 8 years, and within the first 4 years of my working career, I didn't take a single day off. And I used to work every alternate Saturday. I work around 12 hours a day. I mean, advertising is a crazy, crazy industry, right? And for some reason, we thought we were saving lives there, like we were more important than doctors. And after a point, you sort of hit saturation, and you're like, what am I doing? And this was the only way I really knew how to sort of express myself. And it came out as an angst in the beginning. It was pure rage, which sort of manifested itself into poetry. And it got the clutches of people around me, the things that were happening. I wasn't the only one. There were people coming in and going, and it was just becoming like a sort of really long narrative. And even today, if I just pick up pieces from where I started, like randomly, I see an entire storyline sort of forming from where it started to where it's going. That's very interesting because it's the darkest times. On the other hand, poetry became a lot easier as a device. It started off as just 2 stanzas, 4 lines each. So in total 8 lines, and I had my entire energy released right there. And from there, it just kept growing. Even today, if I have to write a long email, I can't do it. I start thinking in rhymes before I start thinking in paras. And it's so much easier for me. As for who really inspired me, not to inspire. I mean, it's not like I really follow anyone in particular. I read around whatever I get, and truthfully speaking, it's more of the amateur poets who I see stumble upon, who I see online, that I find a lot more interesting. There are so many really great pieces out there with just anonymous written, and that's sort of where you tend to get more motivated from. Of course, there are the likes of Lewis Carroll and Sylvia Plath and a lot you've all read, but it's more about that whole unknown sect that exists online, which really, really is interesting. That's something I tend to do more.
So, in terms of who have I been inspired by? Again, it's quite an all-encompassing question, but I mean, in my early days, it was people like Walt Whitman who gave me faith in. Walt Whitman was like, he was kind of interesting because his style comes from that kind of Christian, what's the word, like pastor style, but he was a very democratic poet, and he was very politically engaged in his time, and he believed in humanity. He believed in core elements of what makes a human being good, and seeing the good in everybody, and inspiring that too. So, first Whitman, John Donne, because, I mean, like Drupad said, wooing women for a male poet is sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, one of the things. And what I liked about John Donne was, in his early days, it was kind of like just around post-Shakespeare time, he was playing with language, and there was a game and a strategy.
Well, metaphysics.
Yeah, metaphysical poets were really, really quite a big inspiration in my early days. And in my early days, I used a lot of rhyme and meter, and I was very kind of caught up in the game of that.
So you were applying what you had studied?
Yeah, kind of. And I was inspired
this
by...
sounds very like 18th century,
And that was kind of at high school. And then I got to Sussex, and everything kind of turned on its head. And I was introduced to this like massive scene that I had never known existed. That existed kind of under the mainstream poets that everybody was reading in the UK. It was like Caroline Dunn or whoever it is. And their style, it didn't use rhyme. And it was really energetic, quick, political, obscure, really bound up in philosophy, theory, and that also kind of gave me like a new level to the game.
So this is also unpublished, raw...
No, these are all published. Yeah, so J.H. Prince got his whole oeuvre from the 60s until now, published by Blood Axe Press. Annie Tharman have done Keston Sutherland's collected works, Bark Press, who I'm really grateful to be part of, have a huge history of engaging with the Iraq conflict through poetry, and that's kind of what they publish on. So it was all of it, like just kind of knowing where to go and finding the space for yourself, because it's quite easy to, pick up stuff that you're given in a curriculum. But when you actually go out there and you find out some small presses, there's a lot of really interesting things out there. So, and that's everywhere in the world. People write poetry. So you just got to find a little bit of your scene, get involved, go to an event. I'm a big fan of reading poetry out loud, because it gives a kind of different element and more of a community, which I think we really need now, in poetry. So yeah, that's where my start.
I think I don't know how to phrase it without it being misconstrued. I don't read poetry for inspiration as much as I read it to get a glimpse into a time I'm not likely to ever see. A small flower that's going to be growing through these crevices is as much a scope of has as much scope for inspiration as an entire garden like that's blooming at the back. I think, we live in a time where people are forgetting that communal intelligence stems from one gifted individual's ability to remember. And I read poetry to understand what times were like before I existed. And if I'm alive right now, then I want to focus on how I can use the honesty of my existence to add to the collective consciousness of the people now, so that in the future people read what our times have written and say, this is what it was like here. I mean, that's what we're celebrating here through this
So
festival. Right?
are there poets that you read who you feel capture that? Or,
There's Hafiz. I think he would be the one figure that I consider central to what resonates with me. There are many, but Hafiz would be central.
Why he in particular?
I think he's honest and reassuring. That's why.
I think the poet that made me want to write poetry was Wilfred Owen. He had this poem called Strange Meeting, and it's a poem about a German... Wilfred Owen was a World War I poet who died, I think, in the war, and he died very young, 24, 25 if I remember correctly, and this particular poem that he wrote was an experience we assume that he had, where he was completely shell-shocked and he was walking through a trench. He didn't know whether the trench was German or British. And while walking through it, he met an enemy soldier. And the interaction that the enemy soldier and he had in this hellish trench. And it was a very grotesque and violent poem, which was which was accurately representing the war that as he saw it. So what really struck me was the articulation of an experience. And from there, I went on to sort of try and see whether I could copy him, imitate him, see what styles he uses, dissect him, deconstruct him. And I did that similarly with many other poets. William Blake, definitely, in school. Then rock poetry played a huge part. I think Leonard Cohen is a poet par excellence. And I think when I think back to my school days, I remember, like, you write your poetry and you're not sure whether it's good or it's bad. You don't know who else is writing poetry, and you have a friend who's writing poetry right, across the house. And then you read his poetry and he's got like some very articulate words going, and you feel very silly. And you go back and you write your poetry again, and with time you keep experiencing and writing. The whole time, I guess, with time, what you learn is that ultimately the quest is to find your own voice. So that is where I see myself today. There's a lot. I have stopped reading poets to, I would say, imitate them in a great way. And I have moved on to being able to understand poets as poetry as a style of articulation that I can replicate, understand, express.
Right. I'm going to ask you now, guys, to read something of your own. So.
Sure, thanks. So I'm going to read this one piece which I wrote again in a slightly earlier days. This was not exactly a poem, but not exactly a story. It was somewhere in between, and it was slightly one of those questioning and more angry times. I've called it Life. The propensity of life's indigence leaves you to ravish in its small prosperities, leading you to the question, where does it all stop? Is our entire life a battle between the two with an improbable, nay, an impossible outcome of one beating the other? I suppose the best one can do is to cash out when the cards are hot. But doesn't it all seem so futile? Essentially, what have we done different from the 7.3 billion other parasites, all clawing their way to something unknown? What are we fighting, crying, and dying for? Do we even know? Why do we even bother smiling when we know the next minute we are going to bawl? Isn't the nefarious elation in depression just an elongated version of a manic depressor? So why is one considered a taboo and a disease, while the other called life? Okay, so I'll read one more. Sorry. This one's called Lost Words. Rummaging through a library lost, I found scripts long forgone, a language made emotionless, with words of letters and alphabets. Yet poetry seeped undiluted, not turned, a sonnet of passion, a hymn of love. The rawness of words not quite understood, the barrier of language not quite set on to. And an idiot speaks so simply spoke, a world of words discovered without, a simpler time for simpler wines, when Oxford didn't define my love.
So we're doing a second reading after this, right? Okay, cool. So this first reading is about, so this whole book is about the conflicts in Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan, and consequences of that conflict, such as the migrant crisis, or also Islamophobia in an increasingly post-Brexit, post-Trump, post a lot of horrible things world. So this first reading I'm going to do is about the military conflict and leading into the migrant crisis. The typhoons and tornadoes will drop their bombs within hours of democracy. This interested party is reaping and sowing politics in bazaars where pressed black cumin rains gold on tyrants and intelligence. Those sanctimonious pirates have come to put dreamworks on steel slats, detaining these limbless orphans in the name of security from dictatorship. That policy is a terrific bunk bed, flash banging your mind against brick, and those photographs were examples of sexual progress and liberalism. Even prisoners of war can beat democratic, militarized, and bent back double-gagged live on YouTube next to Saddam's hanging. Everything has slipped away into the algebra of the ballot box. Paper becomes shattered glass, crushed under turntables of navels in Aleppo where protest sings. This montage is a garb for unfreedom. It stipends our blood to loan sharks and weeps against the grain. It frightens us with pennies in its foaming mouth, biting down onto our burgundy passes like bullets in a kidney, like mud on an eyelid. When we look in the mirror, we are made to fear ourselves. When you look in the mirror, you see the victim, the innocent, and you say these images are easy, simple, don't experiment with your language enough. With the memory of that moment on platform 6, when the child went to hold my hand, but the greeting is curtailed as his mother drags him away, as if, don't touch him, don't sit near him. And what is worse, rejection by a mother and child, that image so close to home, or the understanding I have of her choice in this climate of fear. Thank you.
So I wish I had some level of proficiency in Urdu, but I don't. However, it says something about the history of Delhi and about Ghalib's time that I and everyone else here is reading their poetry in English. Ghalib was in Delhi at a time when the British presence was quite assertive, to put it in one line. And I exist because my maternal ancestors came to India as part of Queen Victoria's army. So the A in my name is actually Anna Maria, so I am Anglo-Indian. And a lot of my the poetry I'm sharing today is centered on the theme of the pain of existence, because I don't think there's much spoken about how much the Anglo-Indian community is made to feel like they don't completely belong either way. And the other aspect is that in our times right now, we're focusing too much on what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, and not enough on masculinity and femininity. And that's what's making things really horrible and ugly for men and women. You know, man and woman is just one manifestation of the broader concept of masculinity and femininity. And that's why some of what I'm going to read today has, traces of that. So the first piece of prose I'm reading is called A Good Man. A man rendered silent by suffering is a beautiful man to me. My eyes will respect his body, toughened by the sun, snow, hail, and rain. My skin will respond to his nails, blackened by the soil and charcoal from burnt wood. My heart shall rest peacefully in his rough and calloused hands, for a man rendered silent by suffering will be able to hear it beating. The other piece I want to read is Two Types of Woman. To a scared woman, a man saying, I want you, is intimidating. To a scared woman, a man saying, I need you, is power. To a fearless woman, a man saying, I want you, is sheer desire. To a fearless woman, a man saying, I need you, is love.
I'm reading two pieces. The first one is called Chokehold, and the other one is called Immobile in a Mobile. They're about the city. Who are you without your breath? I ask myself. A dry city in a dead heat? Maybe. I look for clues in this fishbowl fast running out of water. And what I find is a gap. A gap in your phone. A gap that exposes your phone. A gap that exposes your soul. Your soul scattered and naked, photographed in pixeling, waiting to dry. And dry it will, because that is our will. Our will that we have etched across the city. Our will painted on every wall, on every street. The same streets that run like veins, birthing us day in and day out. Our streets without complaint. Our streets without breath. This one is called Immobile in a Mobile. I spy from my car a sight not too far. I spy from my car a sight not too far. War games in a lover's park. A small crowd gathers round, all watching, but not a sound. I move on to a kind khaki, uniformed with a smile. A smile he hides behind a cheap black mask, ushering angry honkers, driven completely bonkers by a strange city. A city painted grey in pigeons and concrete. So here I am, sitting in a car, following some cows trying to drive a car, drowning myself in music. I am immobile in a mobile, wondering to myself if I have finally given up on the you and the we. If I have finally given up on this kingdom of polity. On days like this, when I listen really close, I often hear myself repeat, empty yourself to fill your soul. Empty yourself to fill your soul.
Thank you so much. This next question, I'm going to sound a bit condescending, but I thank you all for such lovely poems, reading such lovely poems. But I wanted to ask, I feel that, having at one time, finding expression in poetry, which helped me personally as a writer, I thought that, I find that there are, more poets than takers for poetry, that, there are more people who are passionate, but then they're just writing their own things, and there are fewer people who are just taking in poetry and consuming it every day and day. And so I wanted to ask you, now that we've established that you guys are wonderful poets, how do you promote poetry and make it more widely accepted? What is that contribution do you feel that, you can make? Yeah.
So, I live entirely on a digital sphere. My poetry lives entirely on a digital sphere. There's no book copies, there are no written pieces of paper. Everything I have is on blogs and through social media. And while I share it, I see people sharing it further, which means there exists a small niche of people who are interested and loving reading this kind of stuff. not just that, I see a lot of innovative way in which people are creating poetry. Now, it's no longer just about the words. I see video coming to life through poetry. I see animation coming to life through poetry. I see newer and more unique techniques. Not just that, like our little recitals that we do, like this session, is broadcast and loved by so many people, viewed by so many people. I personally follow this little thing called button poetry, which I'm sure we've all heard of. I've had the pleasure of going and experiencing it firsthand when I went to the US. It's one of the most amazing things I've seen, and that gets shared so often. So we are very lucky people that we live in a digital era where it's just growing wider and wider, and people care about the content they perceive and they see, right? They love it, they interact with it. So that's sort of the reason why we're also building poets. As I said earlier, most of what I've written is inspiration from what other people have written, which I saw through blogs. So it's not about, I mean, it's a loop that we're creating, and that hopefully this will continue.
I think it's really a question of accessibility. So there's a number of ways of looking at that. So digitality is one way of creating a kind of a free, enterprising, and accessible means of finding poetry that you like. But one thing that digital platform needs to catch up on is a level of scholarship around poetry. You cannot now, because we have been a digital society for X number of years, extricate yourself from a 1,000-year tradition of writing verse and having books and having libraries and having courses around this material. So I think there needs to be some more interaction between these two spheres, because the academic sphere tends to have an ivory tower complex. Only once you're in the door can you access the material, and then if not, you have to pay, or the material is obscure and badly explained, and because you're not under the tutelage and guidance of a so-called professional, it becomes alienating. And the digital sphere has given us a way of not feeling alienated by poetry. So I think the time it's slowly going to start happening, I think. The more interest in poetry, the more interest there will be in the history of poetry, and older poets, new poets, alike will have to contribute to having more people come to events like this, to readings. But also we shouldn't totally disregard the value of having a book. Having my own book, I have to say, was previously I published this all on digital platforms. And I still publish it on digital platforms because it reaches a wider number of people that way. And of that I'm very sure. But having a book is also nice. And we shouldn't, you know, objectification is a word that comes with such negative connotations today when we talk about our bodies. But the objectification of poetry in the form of a book it's a gift. It's something you keep in your house. You can pick it up any time. And it also gives you a time when you are alone with yourself rather than having the distraction of the kind of whirlpool that the internet can drag you into. So that's what I would have to say about more people will have to engage with both spheres.
I actually completely agree with what both Ishan and Azad have said. There's so much commercialization and competition in the blogging world and on social media, Instagram, Facebook, etc. That I think people have forgotten that a blog is basically a virtual version of the Dear Diary that most of us, if not all of us, used to maintain when we were younger. So people who put themselves out there and share their Dear Diary with the rest of the world who's reading or just going through pictures on Instagram, I think they're already giving people a platform to heal, a platform to be inspired, a platform to learn. All of my work is on the digital platform. That's because it is a development of our times. It is a currency in which we deal. There are a lot of people who connect with written content on digital media when there's an attractive visual attached to it. But I think there are a greater number of people who will read what's written just for the sake of what's written, and there doesn't have to be an attractive photograph attached. So I think there'll be a certain number of likes for a piece of prose that's written with a beautiful picture of a Goan sunset. But I think the number of likes that a post gets where the background is black or white and then it's just the text, which shows you that people, even though people are on Instagram or Facebook, but they're operating from a very melancholic, private space. It's like they're in this mental cubicle and they get to see. There's a voyeurism to it. And the fact that they pay attention to what's being put on Instagram or Facebook and they engage with it says that all manifestations are relevant. But yes, I do agree with Azad. We should not disregard books as we've known them. It is part of our collective consciousness, as I said earlier, and I think books should not become what landline telephones have become, you know. I think our kids should know what it means to open up. Our kids should know what the smell of an old book and a new book is. We know it, you know, and I don't want my daughter or my son to not know it, because when you're familiar with sensory experiences like that, it's amazing how that becomes creative inspiration to write, to paint, to make music, you know. So I completely agree with you. It has to be a balance between the good old-fashioned book and the digital platforms that we use today.
I think poetry can only exist in two forums, the tangible and the intangible, the digital being the intangible. And I think the digital platform as a whole is set to be overhauled very soon. I'm very optimistic about it. I think currently the entire problem with content creators is the fact that they cannot monetize their content in a way that it is meaningful for them. So the entire concept of a starving artist is just perfect. But if there is no basic income for the artist, then the art will always suffer. But then they have to pander, they have to do all kinds of things. So today there is a very definite problem with poetry in the sense that it is not properly monetized. A poet may not earn enough. They will always have to be a lawyer or have a moonlight or something else to just make ends meet. And that definitely takes away from what poetry is and can be. Another thing is that poetry is a very meditative process. It's a process where through the minimal of words you are trying to extricate the maximum. You're trying to imbibe an experience of something. And that, to me, it has always been a tangible experience where I have to physically hold something so that the entire world is out and I know that my WhatsApp is not going to go ping. And but that being said, I believe that I think the digital media has definitely revolutionized the way that poetry is read, received, consumed, written. People are writing on phones. Eminem used to write on a napkin and a bus. So it's the same thing but in a different way. And for me personally, like till the time I write a poem with my own hand on a piece of paper, it is not complete. I can write it on a typewriter thousands of times, or a computer, sorry, not a typewriter. Thousands of times, but till I write it with my own one hand. Less said the better. I think I'll leave it there.
So, but these are actually very interesting times because, we are in the age of Rupi Kaur, who has this Instagram poet who has millions of followers and has now published 2 books, I think, and she's no longer the starving artist. She was, in fact, recently in Jaipur. I do realize that we have very little time left, and I had promised you another round of reading, so I would like you to read the second part, and then we can open it up to the audience.
Thank you. So the next one I'm going to read is basically about the fears that used to be and the fears that have become. It's called The Monster Under My Bed. I miss the monster under my bed, my confidant, my best friend. I miss the loud tapping on the floor, the banging doors in an empty home. I miss the peaceful sleep in the haunted home where curtains moved without the help of the wind. I miss the fear of senseless things, the haunting beats that made me sing. I miss the irrational fears and frights, the ghosts and sheets that I seek to find. For now my fears don't go away with the cover of the sheets. The beasts are real and hauntingly so, they dare to even call you on the phone. They live on mails and in machines, manifesting into unrealistic realities. In times and deadlines and charts of sorts, the monsters sometimes take human forms. They sympathize and empathize and sometimes even shed a tear. They tell you how to live your life and kill you with every word. I miss the monster under my bed, my confidant, my best friend. Just one more. This one's called Sandman. It's about the love that sort of never comes or appears. Uh, this is slightly old writing when it used to be more about the love that never appears.
Sorry. I think that we're running
Sure.
out of time, so
Yeah.
sorry about
No
this.
worries.
But we'll just be very brief because otherwise everyone won't be able to read.
Sure, okay. Briefly, I have to say this because about this book and about what the reading of the poems I'm about to read. You know, I grew up with a Muslim mum and a Hindu dad, and there is something to be said for secular poetry and secular ideas, especially today when we're watching the brutalization of Hinduism by Hindutva and the brutalization of Islam by fundamentalists in many regions of the world. So this reading I'm about to give, it begins with the kind of decimation of the Shabaz Qalandar shrine, and you know, this was my way of writing back to terrorists who literally have nothing to do with the culture and the faith that my mother is from, as far as I'm concerned. I resurfaced from the watercloth. My soul is with Lal Shabazz. Looking at the turn of the tourniquet, my neck exposed in the grey water, halved over borders, quartered in quarantine, my black gaping eyes of mourning. The watercloth took me into a new neurology. I felt compressed and bathypelagic like an uncontrolled urban spread, forced into a point, lugging this burden of staying still with all the ways of knowing. This, my era of discount at the gunpoint or the checkpoint. I am the snot dripping from that child's nose, the tears that child can't feel down its face. I washed up as human contraband, greeted by hazmats on the sandbanks, left under tarpaulin at the mercy of your disinfectant sprays and orderly truncheons. I wore my hair proudly as a seashell necklace, swimming in endless, colourful coral. I swam across shores to find the pearl that will liberate me from this ghusl's penance. Thank you.
This one's called Happily Ever After, and it is inspired from personal experience and the self-work that one decides to put oneself through when they're trying to move on. I can see you now. My soul has been following the sound of your voice for as long as it can remember. When times were simpler, I heard it as a whisper in the breeze, an urgent rustling in the branches, a hiss in the sinking sands, an echo in the crashing waves of the ocean. It emerged from the mechanic crescendos of planes and trains. I heard its sighs tolerate the empty switching on and off of laptops and televisions. I felt its tough love when it went quiet on me, as I paid spiritual debts from another time, something I had to do without you. Now, it's still silent, not as tough love, but a patient greeting of homecoming. Now, your voice is beginning to take fragrant shape. Now I can see you. But don't let my knees buckle under the weight of my journey. Let me hear your voice, crystal clear and kind, so I know that you know how tired I am.
The last poem is called The Good of Action is Timing. In a city painted brown, with smoggy dust broken down, fires and desires here run amok. Breathe in, breathe out. They tell you to live right. They tell you to not shout. They tell you to sit in a car and bow out. But you fight. Sometimes you surrender, but you fight. You fight the day to the end. You repeat. breathe in, breathe out. You focus your mind and you drive. You steer clear of the gods, the lords, and the frauds. You focus on a way out for you and for me. You breathe in, you breathe out. So how do we begin? Where do we end? Do we let out a shout? Do we sit in my car and drive out to a green patch somewhere to see what we see? But what will we see? The many hours in a clock? Tick-tock. The trick to making time stop? Maybe. We breathe in, we breathe out.
Thank you, sir. I don't think we have time for question and answers, but they're all here and you can talk to them after the session. And thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
On behalf of my team, I would now like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the speakers and the moderator for taking out time from their busy schedule and sharing their poetic words of wisdom with us. I would also like to thank the audience for their keen interest and presence in the session. And a very warm thanks to the logistic and support team, without whom this event would not have been a success. On behalf of the Words in the Garden team, we would now like to present a token of appreciation to our esteemed speakers and moderator for this session. Thank you. The next session in Gandhi King Plaza is Gustaranabad. It's a discussion on publishing by Vishali Mathur. And at the same time, there's a session, Mehfil-e Shairi by Murad Ali in Deshmukh Auditorium. Thank you.